Okay, so this is just a general overview of what is legal engineering. So it'll be a bit of a whirlwind, but we'll get into specific topics over the week and then do some hacking over the weekend. So don't worry if this is a lot. We're not going to, it's just the kitchen sink, and we're not going to go into all of it during the week. But legal engineering is a new profession, and so there's a lot of kind of surprising integrations with mathematics and robotics and other areas that you wouldn't necessarily expect with law. But if we think about law, that law does permeate pretty much all the industries in some way, shape, or form. And then we'll have the point of these discussions. So let's see, here. So the week structure. So today and tomorrow we're going to do general academic discussion. So what is legal engineering today, as well as what is polycentric law. That's a new way to look at law that allows for the iterative process that's software is used to doing. So that's, to me, absolutely critical innovation that is very recent. And we'll talk about that later today. And then we'll also be talking about what is legal ethics, because that is an area where there's a few areas, aspects of legal ethics that up to this point were very appropriate, but now because of the information age, they've become not a feature, but rather a bug of legal ethics. So we'll discuss that as well, and those will be the things we were prioritizing in the hack, but also thinking about DAC, or defensive acceleration. So both the academic days, the general as well as the specific, we're going to try to do Socratic. That's because of how intelligent, bright, and learned everyone is here. I think it's really a fantastic opportunity for us to cross-pollinate, and so the straight-up lecture seems a bit of a waste, and hopefully we can sense make and have some emergent education that we make together, and then we can have that be lectures down the road. And we'll also be working with the tech stack that I mentioned earlier that Foresight uses to help us with cartographic work on some of the legal regulation that we're hoping to have as kind of the minimum consensus that's needed between all these different states, network states that are forming, or coordinations, or whatever you want to call them, but as long as they can do interstate or interdata commerce. So we'll be mapping that out, and then we'll be delving into what parts of it potentially we can turn into solidity. So like I said, this talk is going to be a lot, but don't worry, let it just flow over you, and we'll focus on the more important things as we continue throughout the week. So this is an emerging profession, so that's one of the reasons it's kind of scattered all over the place. There isn't actually courses around yet that teach it. Stanford now has fellows that are legal engineers, but those are PhD, and it is far from being 101 legal engineering in all law schools. But that's what we're all good at here is frontier work and processing a bunch of information very, very well. So the first complexity, I suppose that's called. So the first modern legal engineer, to my mind, is Charles Goldfarb. He was a Harvard lawyer and then was working at IBM, so kind of on the MIT side, and that's where some of the earliest legal engineering happened, just because Cambridge, Massachusetts has that lucky proximity between those two institutions. And he took a markup language in contract negotiation and thought, well, why don't I do this to better parse documents? And so the IBM needed him to store, we needed a solution to store all these documents. And so that's how HTML came about. And then it was necessary for the creation of the internet. That's what Tim Berners-Lee took, made it into HTML. An interesting reason he made it HTML was a success for World Wide Web, so for intercomputer exchanges, is that he didn't require perfect compilation. So HTML required perfect compilation, and we are, as programmers, are used to that. That's often a good thing. But between computers where data is lost and all that, it's good to also have some flexibility so things can actually just move forward. And interestingly enough, for me, the very first legal engineer, in my mind, arguably, is Pierre de Fermat, like way when ago, and he was the grandfather of calculus because he took what I think is de minimis concepts in law so that court proceedings can move forward. And he thought about that in mathematics and created adequality rather than equality, which eventually became infinitesimal with Leibniz. And then that became limits. I can't remember who formalized our calculus right now, but whoever did the limits. So anyway, why a lot of us are here is Nick Szabo made smart contracts, and that to me is programming language Turing complete, but with constraints where there has to be consideration. And via those constraints, that's how we have gas and how we have this payment system and incentive mechanism for distributed computing and execution of code by a vast array of machines. Oh, I don't want to do that though. Do you want me to click on it? I'm good. I can see it. Hey, can people see this well enough, or do you want me to? Here, I'll just click on it. Okay. I am going to go into the tab, but that's fine for now. Okay, so working definitions. So legal engineers, and I did this in collaboration with AI. I've been collaborating with AI for years, so I really like doing that. I feel that's an important aspect of legal engineering as well as where we're headed as a society. So anyway, legal engineers are endeavoring to enhance the rigor and precision of the legal field, aiming to refine and elevate the precision and clarity of legal concepts and frameworks. Sometimes it's a very, I didn't mean polycentric here, I meant polymath pursuit. But yeah, because it's a brand new profession, so people have to pull from different professions and put them together. And that actually is a concept in patent law where you can't make anything new under the sun. So if somebody says they made a perpetual motion machine, probably not. But if they took this thing and they just taught against it with this other thing, then that's probably much higher chance of being an actual invention, industrial invention at least. So here's a provocation. So is this law's horse and buggy to car transition? Are we being nice about how a coachman can't be a chauffeur? And so what I'm saying here is that lawyers right now they deal with horse and carriage matters for a large part, but in the 21st century and 22nd century and onward, it's going to be much more how deal with mechanics and so just how the coachman had to maintain stables and that a chauffeur has to maintain oil and very, very different, but there's also some overlap. They still are driving something on the road and can't hit something direct toward and all that. So there's some still baseline between a coachman and a chauffeur. But unlike in this analogy, the underlying issue is literacy. So in most lawyers, including when I was at Stanford with their legal engineers, still use the term natural language for English and other legalese, and then computer code and computer language for other languages. And for me, it's the evolution of language. There's not a sharp separation between them. So for instance, there's these disputes called Oxford Comma disputes. Sometimes they're worth millions of dollars because of the ambiguity of legalese. But an array, which is, we can put that in legalese, we don't even need to use a computer, would fix that. Just that syntax already. But then with the availability of computers to be able to compile all of this or interpret this, might be a more easier word to kind of reconcile with what people do with legalese. It's much more accurate. So if you get a person to read legalese, they're going to read it in different ways, and the whole area of being a professional is interpreting legislation and that, because it's very complicated. Whereas if a computer, a compiler interprets or an interpreter interpret they're going to do it the same way. We have done a fairly good job at all of our circuit boards following standards that allow that, which is that coordination is pretty astounding actually, as a species. There's a lot of Moloch out there, but we should pat ourselves on the back with that capacity. But anyway, so this has always been something I've been excited about. When I was in enterprise music publishing and saw the inefficiencies of legal information supply chain, that we should have it so that computers, we have an API in the very least at the back end of a complex contract, so that people down the road don't have to in my mind, do a bit of practice of law, doing interpretation. And when they're not lawyers, they're administrators. We can instead just have them click a button and it shows up. But regardless if you want to embrace modern language evolution or not, the LLMs and other big data statistical methods are interpreting legalese and fairly accurately as computer systems anyway. So that's one of the areas, a big reason why legal ethics is becoming a problem, because the whole idea that lawyers just don't make products. Lawyers have deliverables, but those aren't really products, so they're just static. Words on a page is becoming less and less real because, again, if you just have a document, an AI can turn that into a living document, which is a product. So it's kind of the flip side of software as a service. So when we're saying software as a service, we're kind of saying we've made a service into a product. So that's something that legal engineers are embracing wholeheartedly, and again have actually kind of made manifest along with many other developers and builders. So yeah, why do we care? There's lots of room to improve legal process. Governance is 30%, a third of GDP, according to Eric Brimman, CEO of Prospera. And we're seeing more and more governance innovations. That's the other track here is decentralized governance, and Prospera is an example of governance as a service. I personally don't like software as a service, but I totally get governance as a service, and you know, not everything has its place in the right proportions. So what about KYC? Over 90, yeah, according to some stats, it basically doesn't do anything for what it's espoused to do. So people who mention those stats tend to say it's because of taxation. That's more the priority than actually it's what people say its main purpose is. And if we look at its main purpose, then if that's true, that's a big failure. And so maybe we can, as legal engineers and Solidity developers, figure out ways to have better better solutions that actually fix the underlying problem and allow people to still live permissionlessly and with liberty. So what about paying taxes? That's already painful, and then you have to spend all this time filing the taxes. So if I were constructing a nation, that would be the one thing I would avoid sociologically or psychologically is to have a scenario like this where people have to give money when they don't feel like they have to another party, and they also have to spend a lot of attention to do so. It seems like a recipe for conflict. So now I'm going to say, yeah, so these are some of my legal engineering projects. I'm just really kind of giving you a sense of how broad legal engineering can be. So this here is, we're talking about legal wrappers. Legal wrappers is the way we can have on-chain organizations. Really, we've got the most important thing for a lawyer is when there's finances involved and people are co-managing those finances, then that's a partnership. I mean, some people are arguing still it's not a partnership, but then when it's a partnership, everyone has shared liability. So if one partner does something, everyone else is exposed to it, including their personal income. So legal wrappers, that's when those are something that you should really consider, and that's basically saying, well, this knows this safe or whatever else. This is not us as individuals. This is a corporation, it's a separate person, or a limited liability company, something like that makes it more arm's length from the individuals that are actually managing the fund. Then we've got another one here. Talking about network states and special economic zones. That's an important topic for ZuVillage for sure. This one I really like talking about permissionless AI, and basically it's having AI be a lawyer. So in a big picture, but in the short term, something like the AI can make legal entities. That's something we can do in Prospera as long as the legislation is approved, but we have good luck there. And it's fairly easy to get legislation approved because of the polycentric nature of Prospera. But yeah, so imagine a car. Well, if the person isn't driving the car and it causes a tort, so it hits something, then if we just say, well, the chassis is a person, then that's pretty easy. So if the AI is managing multiple vehicles. Each vehicle is a person, and then we can bring in insurance and all that other existing body of law. And while I'm mentioning that, actually that's one of the reasons we've got these pens that say signature economies on them. Kernel community did come up with the concept of signature economies, that being one of the main driving forces of why this new economy with Ethereum has developed. But it's really, just think of your EOA address. So you've got your private key, and then there's a public key, and then you're using your private key to sign off on all this stuff. So that's Ethereum attestation services. That's also leaning in to this kind of atomic unit of decentralized ledger technology. And if we think about the public-private key, that's also zero-knowledge technology. It's just been around a long time. The internet has relied on it for Web 2, has relied on, I think even Web 1 has used, well, SSL uses it. Anyway, it's fundamental to distributed or multiple computer systems, intranets and internets. But yeah, that's a zero-knowledge, because you've got your private key, no one else knows it, but you can prove that you have your private key. And that continually prove it, we can think about it in traditional legal world as signatures. So if you'd like to pick up one of our pens, when you're looking at it and wondering why do they have signature economies here, that's why. And so every time you're signing it, in reality, we're trying to connect you with every time you sign your MetaMask. That's effectively what's happening as well. And one issue we have, especially is that this pen, I lose this pen, I still have my signature. But with my aux address, if it gets compromised or I lose it, I don't have the ability to sign anymore. So I'll show an example of something that deals with that. It's HATS protocol. It's this one right here, very simple. This is as simple as a HATS protocol can get. So you just have the top hat, which you don't really use the top hat for anything other than generating the knots on the DNS up there. But so yeah, so that's why it's a two branch tree, but really it's just, that's the leaf, the director leaf. And it's got three rares, but the point here, right, this hat doesn't do anything really as a tree logic. But if I need to change out my aux address because it gets compromised, or say I get replaced, then we can just move bestState.eth, and then for something like snapshot or Gnosis Safe or whatever else, then that's all already good to go. So if we're having our aux address be the thing that is connected to every single one of these dApps, then what's going to happen is if we change out our aux address, we've got to change every single dApp. But if we centralize it to this abstraction here, then all we have to do is change that, and then as long as all the dApps are pointing to that, then changing that, then we'll have also changed all the dApps. So there's other ways to have that extra abstraction layer than just hats. I know Soulbound is another solution, but yeah, we can talk about pros and cons if we want about those, but I haven't really put that into our curriculum, getting into the weeds about the different ways to protect against or have long-term robust signature economies. Okay, so let's go on in a little more. And then to other things, have some great chats with various people here and there, but here's some legal seals. Actually, let's go here. So this is a blog. Mathematics has been some stuff I've had to pursue. That's because if you think about what documents are, that it's really actually pretty low-level information technology, and that's what lawyers are using as vehicles, as documents. So again, Goldfarb is an example. He made markup language, and so I also have worked quite a bit with fundamental document technology, which right now it's at the point where it's seed. It's really just you can have a look at this, but it's a hierarchical script databases. So it's a combination of scripts and databases together. And the idea there is, even though von Neumann, we want to separate data from instructions at the natural language, at the human understanding level, it's verbs and nouns are right next to each other. So this is, trying to have something like JavaScript be more on the verbs and nouns next to each other than reflection than the von Neumann reflection, because it's such a high abstract language. And but to do that, I had to work quite a bit in some mathematics. So this proto-INFT, that's something we're going to work on a bit later with the basically de-acking the front end. We've already built out some concepts of SSL plus and recognizing how important the remote protocol control is. And so we'll get in more detail in that particular topic. In fact, now it's time. So that's a lot, I know. So here are the critical DAC topics we're going to cover this week. So this is stuff to actually pay attention to because it'll be repeated. So SSL and RPC, that's what I just mentioned. It's a little bit complicated to explain, but again, we'll have a session about it later this week, and then we'll potentially riff on it over the weekend. Network state legal kernel, we'll definitely riff on that over the weekend. We're going to start with polycentric law today, and then we're going to get into the Roatan commercial code, which is based on Tom Bell's ULEX legal kernel, which I'm suspecting we're going to find a certain amount of it as a kernel, and that we can actually isomorphize into Solidity, but a good chunk of it is going to be frameworks, and then how much of that framework is something that is that we want to share in multiple network states. Well, actually, the Uniform Commercial Code is a great example. I think this is brilliant, this stuff, because it's prescriptive. You can use it or not, and that's proven out with the United States. So each state does its own contract law. They deviate from each other somewhat, but without having a centralized control system, a central command, each state is reconciled sufficiently with the other states that interstate commerce is totally fine with each state being able to self-determine its own commercial codes. EVM, superchain, cybernetic, that's what this is kind of being called. So basically why cybernetic matters is because it's not purely DAO, so we can't keep it isolated as a parallel universe and just have it as digital assets, which that's, when you think, maybe I don't even need a legal wrapper. So Bitcoin is an example of that. There's not a company at all, no legal wrapper with Bitcoin, but it's only a digital asset. So why would you need it? But cybernetic is where, say, you're buying land with a DAO or at least DAO tooling, and so then you're buying land, so you have to interact with the traditional environment. And so what does that look like on Ethereum virtual machines? At least the ones that are signing the superchain agreement. What do we want to instill there with the operating system? Burns spoke a little bit about it in his intros, but we'll go in more detail and what we think about as a community. So here's an example of a DAO, early stage DAO, and it is kind of a monolith, at least the very first version of it. And then what we're seeing though with operating systems, what I'm anticipating, these cybernetic operating systems, it's multiple modules. So each group gets really good at doing a module. For instance, HATS protocol. To me, that's like a lot like Chown and Chown. So like command line stuff, like file system kind of control systems. But for these kind of cybernetic organizations potentially. And then there's Wrapper that the Kelly team is specialized in. And then there's also Kelly. This is another. This is the DAO system the Kelly team's worked on. And so this is the Moloch V3 framework. And that's an example actually of a system that already is. We should seriously consider the Moloch framework to adopt it or some part of it as our kernel. That was a collaboration of quite a few different teams, and it's from version 1, 2, and 3. That's where RageQuit came from, and there is a proposal for a version 4. But that's very. And the reason we want to do modules, the operating system thing, is that's Unix philosophy. That's what's taught in Unix philosophy. So we're just trying to, as legal engineers, take all these computer science patterns and put them into law, and how does that work? And the Moloch framework is a great example of people who may not consider themselves legal engineers, but if they've worked on that framework, they might have a bit of legal engineering prowess. So just kind of semantics, really, sometimes with all this stuff. Yeah, so just use some more examples of Kelly. Kelly, because it is done by an actual legal engineer, really focuses on having a legal wrapper that's part of the DAO itself, and then having quorums that are similar to the kind of quorums you find in say, your local condo annual meeting type of thing. So we're a little bit over half right now, halfway, and I know I've said quite a bit. So why don't we move this on to questions? I guess the last thing I'll say is a big part to me of legal engineering, at least the EVM-based systems, because it's all open source and permissionless, is 80 to 90% of what legal engineers are doing should be open source. Law is a public good. That's a core value of mine. And so a lot of the work I'm doing is with not-for-profit organizations. So we can make sure we do that. Kelly is a great example. They're full free software. They do AGPL licenses. Where I'm positioning the work I do, it tends to be open source software. So because I am kind of in that cybernetic world where I'm bridging into the traditional world. And so this is another, so yeah, I spend a lot of time with also Lex Clinic. And you can maybe chat with me if you're interested in learning more about legal engineering by joining the clinic. But yeah, with that, I know this has been a whirlwind. It's again, remember, it's just kind of a big overview. So that just let it kind of wash over you. But if you have some specific questions we can chat about over the next 15 minutes, please feel free to. Yep.
So you just mentioned Kelly has a legal wrapper that they're trying to make actually part of the DAO. This may be a basic question, or if you could just give kind of a basic lay of the land of what is the norm with DAOs have with these legal wrappers. I know Biohacker DAO is having a lot of conversations about this, and some people are claiming that there is no real legal wrapper for a DAO. And so I'd love like just an overview. What is actually out there, what is happening, what makes Kelly unique in that, and we could talk more deeply later.
Yeah. Well, Kelly is about that team is about as into that you don't need a legal entity whatsoever in this new paradigm while still having one. So they're almost like just a distraction for regulators to preoccupy themselves. Like that's the level Kelly is concerned about it. So if you look at Kelly's, if you go to wrapper.wtf and you look at the LLC, its operating agreement is very, very, very sparse. And behind it is this Ricardian LLC, which we'll chat about this in more detail because smart contracts are fit with current legal ethics, but and they were made in 1998 by an example. But 2 years before, Ian Griggs, he made Ricardian LLCs, and it's a hybrid. It's some code and some legalese. But this is actually for legal ethics, not really doable. And that's a big reason why we've set up this firm in a special economic zone in the sandbox, because we can be a law firm that's also making products, which is what Ricardian LLCs kind of require. So yeah, so if you look at the wrapper, the way that they make it, so you barely have any legal entity, and again, it's basically as thin of a wrapper as you can do. If you look at this LLC is a child of a parent LLC that is a public good that Kelly maintains. Somewhere in there that they maintain that as a public good. So yeah, if it's a digital asset, I think actually we get in a lot of problems. We create legal complexity where we don't need, because it's we're using traditional asset and traditional property concepts, and we're trying to bring it into this very different world, and so that means that we're reconciling languages and doing any kind of work, translatory work with law is incredibly expensive. So it's kind of AI is making translating really simple, and then that's how it's affecting law as well. But yeah, without AI, if you're asking actual lawyers to do it, even a small innovation on what an operating agreement is, if they don't immediately in 5 minutes know what that operating agreement is, then you might be charged $2,000 an hour for them to just, basic, oh, this is different. Not even I don't get it, it's just different. So when we're bringing in traditional property law, there's definitely going to be areas, even if it's fine to reconcile them, that it's going to be really expensive because that reconciliation has to happen. And often it's actually just inappropriate. The bundle of sticks, the rights and obligations of the traditional world just doesn't really fit well with the digital world. So An example historically is writs. Writs back in the day was the only way you could do a litigation with someone else, and at least in the English common law. And so near the end of writ's life, where you can only do a certain writs to get your case heard, lawyers were incredibly creative about how to get what constituted within a certain writ. And we're seeing that right now. And yes, Web3 startups are in large part paying for this awkwardness. So that's why we have the signature economy narrative. So when we talk in legalese, we don't mention ownership whatsoever, and we just mention this person is signing the digital and they have control. So we just connect the person with the signing control, and don't even give any comment on what's happening in the digital world. Just be silent on that. So there's no need to translate between these two worlds. And that's something that's very different, at least in April when I was at Stanford, they were talking about having everything be isomorphic. And to me, that is not really something that's viable, and that's because of this. This is deterministic versus discretionary. So Martin Schmidt of the Q blockchain, he has this analytical method, and so far I think it's just spot on. One thing I've added is it has to be latency deterministic. So even though it's deterministic, it has to be at the speed of whatever the transaction needs. But otherwise, yeah, deterministic versus discretionary. So at Stanford, they were kind of calling this discretionary thing. They were saying, well, there's vagueness in the law. Vagueness is actually a feature of the law. And that's basically them kind of looking at discretionary. But AI can help with discretionary because it handles vagaries. That's kind of the point. So you can go at it from a statistical method, especially if the AI is a bit of a co-pilot. Yeah, that was a bit long-winded answer to your question, but I think people are spot on with something like Bitcoin, and then it just depends on what percentage of what their dealings are that is not purely digital assets, and then think about those, what can that be isolated as an operating company, and then yeah, try to have that as separate from the digital world as possible, because we don't really need dispute resolution. But I guess that's in the digital world, that's where you really think about it. So if you don't really want to have code as law thing, so if somebody breaks into your code because you have a bug and they steal $1 million of your dollars, if you want to have that be something you could like pull back, then that's when we want to do deeper integrations. And Q is an example of a blockchain that's pioneering on that level. So they have a way to have decentralized, but judiciary type of dispute resolution types of actions, but it's still very different than the traditional dispute resolution environment. So it's not really there yet, but it is, even if you want to have remedy, the traditional world is just not at the speed that blockchain is at, and takes a long time to understand, and that's incredibly expensive, like I was saying before. So even there, I think it's totally valid to not want to go into the traditional world and just recognize, well, we just don't have the dispute systems in place yet for this new paradigm where control is just a bunch of secrets, zero knowledge, a bunch of private keys all over the place. Okay, some extra questions do people have? Yeah.
I mean, I don't know much about it, but I've heard of Cleros, and I've also heard that it moves quite slowly because it's a bunch of lawyers, and so it's not like keeping up on like the speed of tech. But it seems like it's one attempt at having arbitration that's Web3 native. I don't know if you can speak on it. Do you have any
Claros.
thoughts on that?
I do, yeah. One of the things that I guess I haven't spent tons of time in Claros, or I haven't spent any time really in Claros, so it's my peers saying what their thoughts are really on Claros, and the issue is you make your earnings on being part of the majority, which could be a problem. I think it's great to have that experiment, but that definitely runs against traditional concepts of legal ethics. But that's why it might be good, to do this, the workshop that we're planning, because teaching against, again, that's how inventions are made. So maybe that, we think, oh, that's bad, but in this other paradigm of logic, that's actually the better way to go. And Gödel showed that there's you can't have one logic system to rule them all. So I think that's great that's happening. Something I'm working on that just got approved for Gitcoin grants, which is why I brought it up here. Yeah, this here for the Arbitrum, this right here is it is what I'm calling inverted precedent. And so with inverted precedent, you can look here in some of the thoughts, but basically the precedential system, the top-down precedential system has some, the way that it carries wisdom over the generations is a absolute superpower. And why don't we invert that? So instead of having the top of the pyramid be what's producing these precedents, or not instead, but just additive, we can also have all the leaf nodes, the grassroots, do the precedent system. So this might be a little bit too regen, but people love talking about forests and mycelium and how to learn from those systems, those cultures, economies, and put it into networks. And that is, we can learn lots from them, but also we can learn from fields and how grass works. And so yeah, but more particularly, this is my solution that I'm attempting, and yeah, so far it's gotten some support from the Gitcoin community. So we'll see if we want to riff on it during the hacks. But it's basically what it's doing from a programming pattern lens is so you've got a few functions, and you've only got one input, and you put that input into the functions, and you get an output, and then so one group of people goes, well, you get a couple different outputs, right? One group says, I want output A, and another group says, I want output B. So you've only got the same input, right? And you got a few different functions you can use for it. So that's what precedent system allows for, with having concurring, or a majority, concurring, and dissenting opinions. So with majority, it's what most people think is the right output and the right function for that output. So in a future input, then we should expect the right output for that future input. And then concurring says, well, we like the output, but we think the function for the output is wrong, and in a future input, it's not going to produce the right output. So concurring gets to articulate what its function it believes is. And the dissenting is go, well, the output's wrong. We want a totally different function, a totally different output. And over the years, what we've seen with Supreme Courts and Privy Councils is ultimately wisdom does prevail. People have to maybe be dead and gone a long while before wisdom does prevail, but you look at these old cases and you go, well, this majority was, they were not as wise as the dissenting, and oftentimes that's how society works things out in a very rational modality. So also with AI, if we produce our reasons, so these reasons is what the functions are, then we'll be able to have the AI then have outputs that we know what the reasons are, why those outputs are there. So not only is it a way to have living systems, so we can switch from one function to another, and again, we've got these three different modalities of how we can classify which functions we think are ultimately the most correct, or maybe just at this one era, this function is correct, and then another era, this other function is correct. So it can oscillate by what is correct also. But that allows for all that fluidity while also having enough viscosity to maintain certainty, sufficient certainty. So we can mutate, but we can also be relatively certain. It's a pretty good sweet spot. So why don't we just have that for the leaf nodes? And then because it's this idea is inverted precedent, it's on Web3. We know how important it is for speedy decisions, and so that's also part of what I'm playing around with here. But yeah, we'll talk in more detail in a future session about the inverted precedent concept. So that's probably more than enough in this bird's eye general talk. Other questions?
Maybe a follow-up
Yeah.
question that has been asked before. Is there any jurisdiction right now that allows DAOs or like digital organization to own like real world assets, or that is recognized as or like the fact that the shareholders
Yeah, so that's more the opposite of anonymity rather than the DAOs. So DAOs, if you're willing to have a legal wrapper, then yeah, that legal wrapper is the bridge to the traditional world, and then as long as the legal wrapper control is following what the DAO is telling it, then it's good to go. And oftentimes, it's kind of almost like a circuit breaker what the wrapper ends up being if it's well done. So like a Cayman Foundation has managers. So if the DAO says send all these funds to a terrorist organization, and remember ISIS is arguably the first network state phenomenon. As hard as that is to hear, it was an online enclave, but then manifested into sovereignty. We can, if it's through Cayman Foundation, the manager is held accountable, and so the funds won't move forward. Now that's a loss of control for the DAO, right? But that's why it's a circuit breaker of sorts. So like if you look at the U.S. with Electoral College, it's kind of that. It should always just do what it's told, but there is an occasion for an extreme situation where it doesn't do what it's told. But obviously that's also an attack vector. So yeah, it's actually fairly complicated how to interact with real assets and DAOs. But I personally am, into robotics because that's interacting with real world assets and DAOs in a very Coda's law modality. If you don't have access to the software that's running on the robot, then you don't really have an ability to control the robot. But if you have access, then you can set up trigger systems and all that really easily when the blockchain. And that's these little cheerbot robots I have. That's kind of the point is if you've got a live streamer saying, hey, send money to the Salvation Army, they don't need Salvation Army permission or something like that. They just need to know aux address for Salvation, a simple if-else statement with a REST call on RPC, and then they can do whatever trigger dance, whatever they want for their fun little robot. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to compliment about that DAOs exist. That's just a fact.
Yeah.
And they are essentially civil associations, right? So they can already be interpreted in that nature as they exist. In like continental law, they're sometimes called irregular companies. In common law, they're general partnerships. This essentially means associations of people that do not have a corporate veil. So if something goes wrong, all of the members of the DAO can be responsible. What Kyle was referring to, these so-called legal wrappers, they are essentially just traditional companies, corporations, LLC, that serve as vehicles for the DAOs themselves to be able to contract, to acquire real-world assets, and so on. And I think I'd say they have been very good fulfilling that purpose, allowing the DAOs to interact with that physical world. Kyle was mentioning people are using Cayman Foundations, Panama Foundations, Switzerland, Prospera, a bit of everything. But they're just that vehicle for the DAOs. And I really think that what's going to be a special moment is when we are able to recognize DAOs as they are, but with a level of protection. And maybe, I don't know if you agree, what has happened in Wyoming with the Duna Wyoming, which are essentially decentralized, unincorporated associations. So that is a way that legally DAOs in their nature are already recognized. But even in that case, all members are liable if something goes wrong. So that's what we're getting to, like how do we make that next step?
And then I guess, if a liable, how do you identify them if they're anonymous?
Oh, of course, I mean, there would be a way to, well, there are ways to identify them. Like, say you're keeping your tokens with your address, but you use that address with a centralized exchange that has your info, then I can go to the centralized exchange to ask who is this person. So it's perfect.
Yeah, even Tor has identity because if there's a wiggle here and there's a wiggle over here, and then there's always a wiggle here, and you can start to see the wiggles and not even care what's in the middle. So there's always a risk. Cybernetic organizations, or Borgs is one way to call them. That's another example where it's patchwork. So some of it is not doesn't have any liability concerns, or people are just going YOLO, and then other parts it's in different legal vehicles, so that's an example. And then one thing I'm innovating on, legal seals. That is like a privy seal. If you look at that, that's a pretty good example. And it's really just looking at how smart contracts have been with consideration. It's both ways that you have to give both ways, but with a seal, it's a formality in contract law where you can give just one way. So that I hope will, on top of smart contracts, will offer up a whole area of responsibility dynamics that is not available with this bilateral that's only available with smart contracts. So I think it's good to start with bilateral, but then having a seal and this really formal thing, then we have unilateral, will open up some space. I think your hand was up first.
Yeah, I've heard that there is a special legal form for consumer cooperatives, which has existed for a while, for many years, and in particular quite popular in Latin America. Have you looked into these forms, like the way they govern themselves, like consumer cooperatives, which we actually discussed this morning as a kind of maybe Web3 is a kind of reincarnation of consumer cooperatives in the digital era. So, and in particular in regards to if the member of consumer cooperatives are liable for certain deeds and for certain actions. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I've worked a bit with U.S. co-ops. There was an event at Harvard I was at where the SEC as well as the head of the co-op group nation, I don't know what it is, but the head of the co-op organization, they kind of sat down and told the rest of us that everyone would be happy if we used the co-op framework and imported it onto DAOs. That does work for some DAOs, but in practice, when we've engaged also dog fooding ourselves, the issue is that the investment and is not the kind of investment that, at least right now, DAOs are really excited about. So that whole ICO thing, DAOs still really want, and definitely where our firm is working, because we have that tokenomics flexibility, we're not so prioritizing cooperatives. But yeah, at least the spirit of cooperatives, especially the reason they came about during the Gilded Age with robber barons, and that's when the sophistication happened. That does seem to be an echo of the past, and I do think when DAOs are more mature, we'll see more cooperative models that make sense because it's a group of professionals, and it's not a startup. But right now, it's so startup-y. Yeah.
There's something. There's another historical precedent to look at in the United States that might be helpful. It's one of my personal interests, which is kind of unrelated to this, but also I'll just relate it as a parallel. In the same way that DAOs kind of started to find their footing when they realized that they could represent themselves to potential regulators as digital co-ops. Similarly, the churches in the United States are the only organizations that are categorically exempt from any type of registration requirements. So, you could operate as a digital church in any way that you want, and like, I'm not suggesting that like, oh, DAOs should all be churches. What I'm saying is that the United States government doesn't have the power to require churches to register, to incorporate, to create a legal wrapper, but they incentivize them to do so with the carrot and the stick. And the carrot is that they make it easier for churches to hold title to things like real estate, with that being churches like collective, like largest interest, right? Churches are real estate companies essentially in some respects, and then so they make it easier for them to hold title, because if you don't incorporate, who holds title to all the property that your organization owns? And then so that's the carrot, and then the stick is, as Christian mentioned, the general liability. So if you have a priest or a pastor who gets engaged in some monkey business, every member of the congregation could be equally liable. And so you can just kind of parallel that over onto like the DAOs to say like, okay, well, if they were inclined, like how would they be likely to interpret or reply to those things? And churches have been really creative about the way that they have created like a really strong collective lobbies to get the kind of regulatory like privileges and protections that they want.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's a lot we can learn. Tithing for acquiring public goods, that's one. To me, I think a lot of religiosity, when we do moneyosity, that is a similar thing. So there's this great song from the artist right now, but money is the one true God, and they just go over, and it's a pretty good argument. Yeah. And so thinking then about if we're developing here kind of like an ethnic enclave, maybe we lean in that the identities we can have is through money or these tokens, and then that then we can say, well, the separation of church and state has been great for, arguably great for everyone. If we believe that, then let's separate state and money also. Not sharply separated, but enough that they are, sufficiently arm's length, and there's enough checks and balances. And to me, that's where we can, if we're thinking about what is this kind of big tent of the wider community, and bringing in Bitcoiners, then that. And Bitcoiners are much closer to the idea of religious.
Yeah, the religiosity and moneyness is a bigger gap to bridge though than religiosity or like institutional religions and spirituality. When you think about, like you said, tithing, voluntary tithing toward common interests or causes, you say like there's going to be a lot of really important litigation coming to determine what's the delineation between spirituality and like constitutionally protected religious freedoms, and the only single requirement is really that your beliefs are genuinely held, and the Equal Protection Clause assures that. So what is environmentalism? It's like it displays all the characteristics of a church in many respects. So it's like, depending on what the common cause is that you're coming together for, can very well pass those requirements.
Completely. Yeah, I feel this is a rich area of nutrients that we can pull from in a variety of ways. Corporation soul, that was the very first corporation period. Well, what is a corporation? It's kind of the obsession with body, but then thinking about what are we most familiar with? It's our bodies. It's what we start with and what we end with. So the level of complexity we can deal with is kind of, that's the ceiling. So corporations now have a much more variety than just corporation soul, but that was the beginning of corporations, was corporation souls, and that was the Pope, to make sure that the Pope couldn't be a bloodline, and then it was used for the king to make sure that it was only the king's bloodline, and then we moved on to modern corporations. At some point, corporations had their own military, and then that was not very good for other nations, so we're not doing that so much. But if we look at oil and gas corporations, they still do have their own military, and so, yeah. Yeah, that's great. Let's chat after about it. Real quick, because you asked that question about KYC. This is an example of one thing we're doing practically, the Gitcoin passport eligibility. So this is connecting Hatch protocol with Gitcoin as a potential alternative to KYC. Proof of humanity is that strategy there. So as legal engineers, we saw that there was a basic civic stack we could build out by just connecting these existing protocols and recognizing, that the operating system that hopefully develops will be one that is a bunch of modules from a bunch of arm's length organizations, and so by being a bit of a glue between different organizations, we can kind of help actualize that. So we're 10 minutes past now. Okay, one more question.
On like the passport score, because the one time I was trying to get enough of proof of humanity score, one of the main blockers was there was something that wanted me to pay $50 and give my passport in order to get more score. And if you know which one of those that is, and there's some proof that isn't actually KYCing yourself, but it seemed really ironic. Unfortunately, the Brown ended up finding a different solution.
They're not more personal data than actually KYC.
Yeah, and you also had to connect like your Facebook and your Twitter, like LinkedIn. Like you can make fake accounts for all of these ones, and then maybe it works. But it seems very Web 2 and very not private to try to prove that you're a human. So I
Yes.
don't know if that's what you're trying to solve, which would be great.
Yeah, so KYC, I mean, yeah, we can, this is another kind of like, maybe a quick, like 15-minute, no, these are all really important. These are all key to DEAC. I mean, to me, there's so much we have to do that I point out those three, because those are the topical ones that I'm pushing right now. But KYC, proof of humanity, and actually having that in a way that is non-invasive is incredibly important. So the reason we've invested in Passport is really the abstract layer, just like hats. And so it's saying, okay, you can use this, that, or the other thing. We're not really that opinionated about it, other than we'll say this one is so invasive, like your passport, that you're most likely a human being, because a robot can't really fake that one, so we're going to give a really high score. But then, and maybe they take that down because it actually promotes bad hygiene, down the road. That's possible. So there just aren't that many mechanisms, Web3 mechanisms to proof. But I think Bright ID, they've always had that there. And other ones that are much more Web3, where you actually physically meet each other and it's just social consensus and like proof of stake in a sense, right? But yeah, that'll take some time to develop that. There's one, the hope with the soulbound tokens, which I think something like hats is maybe a better solution there. But yeah, the reason we've kind of are right now at least including hats in the stack is that, or not hats in the stack, but Passport in the stack, is because of the fact that it is unopinionated, including the nasty. Yeah.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Let's do a breakout on this. Let's do another breakout session on the second movie stuff.
Cool. Well, that's what I was hoping. I know this was probably really disorientating, but I hope some of these breakout sessions excitement would happen. So thank you. Yeah.